Hi, this is Tamsen Granger.
This is Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan Read the Paper. It's Sunday. Oh, no. It's Monday.
Monday, July 30th.
It's Monday, July 30th.
Right.
We're a day late and $1 short.
We're a day late.
Because we have been on vacation.
That's right. We can hardly get our act together. We're rambling with Tamsen and Dan. We spent the last week in Block Island, Rhode Island. Block Island being the small island in Long Island Sound between Rhode Island and Long Island.
Right.
And we've been going there, as I think we've mentioned before, forever. And we went again this year, and we had some family members with us. Yes. We had.
But not the full complement.
No, we had...
We were missing a few.
Right. We had Zeke and Noel, and we had Sadie, which is plenty. Although we were missing Granger and missing Nico. So we had a great week. It was just kind of interesting because coming back to New York today, I got to talk to a lot of folks who were in New York last week and told me how terrible the weather was, how it rained an enormous amount every day. And we didn't get that in Block Island. It was
a little challenging.
It was challenging in a different way. It was humid.
Yes.
And it was often uncomfortable. And yet we were outside a large portion of every day, which is what you want to do.
The funny thing was that we all looked at the forecast before we went, and it looked like it was going to be cool and rainy the whole time.
Right.
And so we all packed a lot of rain gear and warmer clothes,
right.
And we didn't use them at all. It was hot and humid and not that rainy. It was misty.
Did a lot of bike riding, did a lot of swimming. The highlight, swimming-wise, of course, was Tamsen and Sadie, once again lighting it up at the Great Salt Pond Swim, which is held every year. It's 1 mile long, and it's challenging because it's open water swimming. And they did very well. Sadie, I think, said she came in third.
Oh, Sadie did very well.
Sadie, I didn't get to you yet.
She was the third woman in.
And you embarrassed us, Tamsen. You embarrassed us.
Well, it was a ripoff.
Oh.
It was a total ripoff.
Yes, go ahead. Why is it a ripoff?
Because, last year it was terrible weather. There were small craft warnings.
Right.
Okay, and we toughed it out. We did it. I felt very accomplished, very impressed with myself, very full of myself. And then I found out this year that actually last year, due to the weather, it wasn't a mile.
Yeah.
They shortened it because they thought people would die.
Yes, sir.
And,
so
I go in the water this year. It's a mile. Turns out a mile's very long.
Right.
I'm just swimming the whole time thinking, oh my God, this is taking forever.
But when something's longer, it's rarely described as a ripoff. It's extra. It's bonus baseball.
I was disappointed in myself.
You did very well, Tamsen.
I struggled.
You did very well, and I saw very few mother-daughter combinations. And spoken as a person who's not allowed to do the swim, who's forbidden from even trying the swim by you and Sadie because you think my skills aren't up to it, and you're almost certainly correct. There is no such thing as you're telling me that you didn't do well. You did very well. You did very well. And it's quite an event. It's quite an event. But, the whole week was great. And Block Island is not about high times or fancy restaurants or anything like that. Block Island is pretty low-key. It's about dealing with nature. It's about getting out of your element. It's about having no television. It's about having no internet. It's about being somewhat uncomfortable. Well, that's the crux of it.
Right? We all were saying no to our devices.
Right.
Because, first of all, there's no phone service.
Right.
There's no internet.
Right.
There's no way to do a podcast.
Right. And the food is simple at best, unless Tamsen's cooking. But at the restaurants, it's very simple food. There's some beer around. It's not too bad. And a lot of sitting and talking.
But you like that it's completely different.
I like that it's different.
You find that rejuvenating.
Yeah, I find it sort of takes you out of your rhythm, something we'll come back to later. Makes you look at things a little bit differently. You certainly end up dealing with people, I think, differently and perhaps in some ways better than you often do. There's nothing to distract you. You're sitting and talking, and it just comes naturally to get into more interesting conversations. Even people in your own family are capable of conversation, it turns out. And And the truth is we have fun with each other. The family has fun with the rest of the family.
This is always very nostalgic for us because the kids have been going there since they were peanuts.
That's right.
And our folks used to come with us, so there were 3 generations. And so to be back there again is to stir up a lot of memories. And actually, some of the time is spent going back and doing the things we've been doing there since time immemorial. Right. Just, for the heck of it.
Yeah, there are about 6 or 7 things to do, and you got to do them. And there are 6 or 7 restaurants, and you got to go there. And every time you're sitting out at a restaurant or at a particular place,
6 or 7. How did you get up to 6 or 7?
And you can't help but say, well, remember when we were here with Mom, or remember we were here with Pop, or something like that, or when I ordered the beef, whatever. What year was that? Was that 6 years ago or 8 years ago? Because the menus don't change either, so it's all up to you. You make a good time, and we do manage to make a good time. But
enough about us.
The truth is, we get so relaxed at Block Island, we can't do a podcast because we don't have the nervous energy that fuels the rapid fire response that is this podcast.
So now we're back on the mainland.
Now we're back. We're all riled up. We're all charged up. And we're ready to...
One more point about Block Island that you're going to say. It really is like being in another world. You take a ferry. From some angles you can't see any other land. You feel like you are entirely away from everything.
But that's a critical part of it. That's a critical part of it. You have to be detached. There has to be that physical detachment. It's
only 14 miles from Rhode Island, but it seems like...
It's awfully inconvenient. It's heck to get there, and it's heck to get back. But that's what you have to do to sort of get yourself into the walk-in space that is Block Island, where you're revolving on your own in a different way. It just puts you in a different mode. But we're back. We're in the same mode, the old nasty mode that we've used before. Well, not really nasty. So... one thing that we had identified even before we went to Block Island that we knew we wanted to talk about is what now is the new hottest ticket, well, maybe not the hottest ticket, but in my mind, perhaps the show of greatest new interest in New York, and that is Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish.
In Yiddish.
In Yiddish.
In Yiddish.
Sounds like a winner, no?
How can that work? How can that possibly
work?
Well,
when I first heard about it, I was skeptical, and I should say it's directed by Joel Grey, who's 85, and that too has its own challenges.
Like Joel Grey, the actor, singer,
dancer,
George Cabaret.
M. Cabaret. Yeah. That's exactly right. The father of Jennifer Grey. That Joel Grey. Yeah, that's him. Right, Mr. Cellophane.
So is this on Broadway?
No. It's at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, so it's an unlikely venue. And the idea of getting excited about a musical that's not even in English, notwithstanding its great familiarity, seems bizarre. It's not a high-profile production. There's not a lot of money behind it. There's not great production values. There are no stars. And yet, both the Times and the Wall Street Journal were in agreement that it is fantastic. According to the Journal, they say the result is thrilling, or I think they say first, the Fiddler auf den Dank sounds crazy. No, they get that in. Can this possibly work? The result is thrilling. It's almost as if Fiddler on the Roof were being restored to some primal form. And though the Russian and English translations are projected on the sides of the stage, they're unnecessary. Well, that is one thing that Fiddler has going for it, because
we know all the songs.
They're so familiar that you really know the words. You don't really need it, and it's not as if great secrets are being told on the stage. It's easy to see and understand what's going on. The Times is similarly very enthusiastic about it in a review by Jesse Green, and what the Times and the Journal sort of focused on the same thing, which actually isn't often the case, but the key to both of them was this one intellectual point, and that is, in this production, the focus is a little less on tradition in the way we think of tradition as custom, that being the thing that binds the family together, but on religion instead. And as a result, when you saw the productions that we had all seen previously in English, The tension was whether the family was going to continue to follow custom or whether it was going to step out of following custom and adjusting to the new world. And the subtext was, well, ultimately that's what it's going to have to do. That's what being modern is about. But when you replace custom with religion, not so clear, because religion doesn't bend so easily. And if you're a true believer in a religion, as Tevye's family is supposed to be, well, then you don't change so easily.
So are you saying this creates more dramatic tension?
More dramatic tension, and there's a much greater sense of loss when they're not able to accommodate tradition in the sense of religion with modern developments. And highlighted the critical moment when the youngest daughter marries a non-Jew. The other thing that Jesse Green brought to it, he gave it a very odd review, saying he's always been emotional about watching Fiddler on the Roof, seen many productions. He always cries. It's a part of Jesse Green I guess I didn't realize existed. But what he makes a point, which is, you can see it resonating for the audience here. He says, for me, it's not just the fusillade of familiar words and phrases, Meshuggah, geklempt, sei gesund. It's the sound of my own grandparents and all they lost in leaving their Anatevkas. So when he's watching it, he's connecting with it. In a sense, he's really seeing the actors as he sees the generation gone, and a generation he related to as his own grandparents. And that's another level of connectivity. So we are in the same conundrum as many people in New York are, is can we possibly persuade ourselves to drag ourselves into New York to see a show in Yiddish? We'll let you know if we do that. We're thinking about it.
Can we just go back to the production values?
Sure.
Which you said it's kind of stripped down.
Yes.
Is this part of a trend?
Well, when you say trend, I know you're referring to classic stage and Carmen Jones and John Doyle, because that's the way he does it. And he's been doing it for years. It's hard to call it a trend just because that's been going on for quite some time. I mean, there's always been people who've been preparing things, producing things in a stark way, a more stripped down way. So I think there's always been a place for that sort of thing and an appeal to that sort of thing. But whether that's going to supplant what we see in the fuller productions we're normally seeing on Broadway, that I don't see happening now.
Does that tell us that these are better musicals, the ones that kind of reveal themselves in the stripped down versions? I mean, you can't really strip down SpongeBob.
Well, yeah, I can't. I understand exactly what you're saying, and you're almost certainly right. But I just don't know SpongeBob. But what you're saying is true. I mean, only something with real bones, only a play that's a real play underneath is going to work without all the accoutrements. If its character is going to drive that play, and if there's enough character in the actual play as written, then you'll be rewarded even if you strip it down. I think that's true.
Okay, I'm not trying to be a snob here.
No. And
I'm not trying to be like the Tony Committee or whatever.
The other point,
because there is a place for spectacle and razzmatazz, and we enjoy that.
And again, to go back to this for just a minute, one reviewer makes the point that stripping down also means you get closer to the stories of Shalom Aleichem, which is what Fiddler on the Roof is based on. It's based on some stories that Shalom Aleichem, a great Yiddish writer, wrote. So you're stripping down to something that existed for hundreds of years. So there's some real form to that. And you're, in a sense, truer to the source material when you do that.
All right. So you showed me
I showed you something.
An article about a one-woman show on Broadway. It's come to Broadway. Is it not really Broadway? Come to New York. At the theater at St. Clement's, My Life on a Diet, starring Renée Taylor, who is 85 years young. She is best known as perhaps the
nanny's mother.
The nanny's mother.
Right.
With Fran Drescher's
right.
character's mother.
Well, she was also known before that. She was in Lovers and Other Strangers with Joseph.
Well, she
Bologna.
wrote it with her husband Joe
Joseph
Bologna.
That's right.
So anyway, there's I would say a pretty nice review, a friendly review. Oh. It's a one-woman show based on just quips about her life and her trying to lose weight, and her
yes.
romance, her falling in love with Joe Bologna, etc. And as a matter of fact, I've seen the show.
Right, that's right.
I've seen the show. Sadie and I went to it at the Bucks County Playhouse about 5 years ago.
Right.
And Joe Bologna has since passed away, but he actually put in an appearance, a cameo, in that performance. And so we are familiar. So that's fun. And then it's always fun to go to the Bucks County Playhouse, no matter what Dixon and Mark say. And what's funny on our driving, both to and from, right? The ferry to Block Island.
Right, yes.
And we actually heard interviews with the current powers that be at the Bucks County Playhouse and what kind of things are going on. The Bucks County Playhouse has been there since 1939. Mm-hmm. And it went through some tough times in the early 21st century. And now it's back on the beam.
Right.
So
we'll look for more things from there. Yeah, look, I should just say that when you and Sadie saw it a few years ago, you came back, you and Sadie both unimpressed.
We were underwhelmed.
Underwhelmed, yes. And I suspect that you would
But I think the audience basically enjoyed it.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Joseph Bologna was fun. Joseph Bologna was in My Favorite Year. That was his big movie. It's a fun movie, and he's quite good in it.
Well, they seem like a terrific couple.
Yeah, that I'm sure of.
And an odd couple.
And yes.
Because he was very Italian, she was very Jewish.
Listen, if Joseph Bologna can put up with Renée Taylor, he's a very patient man. That's all. I'll leave it at that. That's all I'm saying. Yeah, so you had...
So speaking of theaters...
Yes, right.
And other things...
Right.
Another article you pointed out to me was about the sort of reuse and repurposing of Catholic churches in Canada.
Right.
And
which it turns out is terribly necessary for one extremely good reason.
The radical makeovers of Quebec and other churches in the area reflect the drastic decline of the Catholic Church in a majority Catholic Canadian province where 95% of the population went to Mass in the 1950s, but only 5% do so today.
That startled me. 95% to 5%. And, that's a different world. I mean, that's a different life. That's a different group of people who relate to each other differently. Can you imagine that? The church being such a big part of people's lives? It just must be a different city now.
And now it's a complete emptiness.
And what's replaced that? What cultural institution has replaced that? I don't know. But there's more to it than empty buildings, that's for sure.
Anyway, as of April, 547 churches in Quebec have been closed, sold, or transformed, according to the Quebec Religious Heritage Council. And they're being used for a variety of things. They're being made over into theaters. In fact, there's a Catholic church in Lambertville, New Jersey, that's now being used as sort of a theater.
Oh, yeah?
It's run by the Bucks County Theater people. And that was difficult to accomplish. People didn't really want that to happen for a variety of reasons. So you have theaters. One church has been turned into a cheese store.
Oh.
Okay. That has maintained a little chapel on the side if anybody does want to pray.
Sure. Right.
And then they become reading rooms for universities, a real variety of uses. Interestingly enough, the cheese store La Fromagerie du Presbytère, owned by Jean Morin. He purchased the church for $1.
Yeah, I saw that. That didn't surprise me because it probably needed
And
a lot of work.
he spent $1.2 million
Yeah.
renovating it. So there is that.
Mm-hmm.
The building, and to some extent its significance, still kind of resonates and exists. It's still there. It's available to the community. Okay, so even if it's being used as a commercial venture. So I think that you're like giving me a look.
No, I think it's all fine. To me, I was most interested by the quote at the end, the young man who now works out in a gym.
Yes, there's one that's been turned into
church.
a gym, and and you can see people lifting or doing yoga in these grand spaces. And what were you going to say about that?
Well, they quote the young man at the end. He says that I've got the article right here. He says, "My grandmother's happy I'm spending time in church, even if I'm working on my biceps and not my soul." So his grandmother's happy.
So. Right. So we're going to continue to have this problem of these buildings that no longer serve their purpose.
Sure.
The other big deal is post office buildings. Right. In many communities, those are the grandest buildings. They're big, imposing, neoclassical or charming or whatever, and now the post office has no use for them.
Yeah, I would say another big deal is department stores. Which we'll get to in a few minutes. Yeah, there's a lot of... Listen, time goes on. And what's interesting about the churches is no one wants to knock them down. So that's why it's quite important to find a repurpose.
But these, being able to renovate and maintain them is just a huge undertaking.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
This guy's got to sell a lot of cheese.
A lot of cheese.
to keep that.
A lot of cheese.
To keep that
he might sell bread also. He's got something else going on. All right, so... now we have a few minutes so I can straighten the world out on the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame induction ceremony was this week, and that gets lost a little bit, although 50,000 people attended it. And, what's nice about the Hall of Fame is that it's all good news. I mean, you have five or six people.
What Hall of Fame?
Baseball Hall of Fame.
Baseball Hall of
in
Fame.
Cooperstown.
Oh, Cooperstown.
Right.
Have you been there?
Yes. I've been there a couple of times.
I have not been there.
You're not missing too much. But it's more the honor that matters. And they play a special game. That's what 50,000 people get to see a game. And then they get to see speeches by each...
I've been near there.
Yeah, Saratoga.
Beautiful part of the country.
Saratoga? Where are you there?
No, it's kind of... I think it's a little bit... it's west of Saratoga.
Yeah.
But New York State, shockingly beautiful state.
Yeah.
Rolling hills.
All right.
Really.
Well, listen.
Worth the trip.
Back to the Hall of Fame and baseball. So there are 6 people inducted. Jim Thome, great home run hitter. Trevor Hoffman, great relief pitcher. Vladimir Guerrero, fantastic hitter. Alan Trammell, shortstop, a complete player. Chipper Jones, Met killer, player for the Atlanta Braves, and also an excellent hitter. And third baseman.
Met killer.
Met killer. Chipper Jones.
There must be a lot of those around.
No. He tormented the Mets so badly that, and his team would beat the Mets and win the pennant, that in the course of this, he had a son, and he named his son Shea. He named his son Shea.
Because he had so many glorious moments
at
there?
Shea Stadium.
Oh, my God.
How insulting was that? And what the Mets fans would do to retaliate is they would chant Larry, 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 because Chipper chose the name Chipper because his real name was Larry. And they thought that would get on his nerve. It never worked. And
those Met fans.
Geniuses.
They know how to trash talk.
They are, yes, they do. And the final one was Jack Morris, who to me is in many ways the most interesting. He was a fantastic pitcher. Somehow the stats aren't quite up to what you might see in a Hall of Fame pitcher, but it felt like every big game that was pitched during the 1980s that you remember now in the playoffs was a victory by Jack Morris. He was a terribly consistent, give me the ball. And his most famous game was a shutout victory over John Smoltz, who you hear on the radio, on the television all the time. Another great pitcher who was in the Hall of Fame last year. So he's a big game guy. So what you have is tremendous enthusiasm. particularly the towns associated with each of these players, and they spend their careers pretty much, by and large, with one team. Not entirely, but it used to be entirely. And when they come time to be inducted, many people from those cities actually make the trip to see their heroes be inducted. So that's all great. But the Times sort of juxtaposed their article on the Baseball Hall of Fame with a little bit on the Basketball Hall of Fame. And what they observed, and this, in fairness to the Times, this is quite provocative and interesting. They said, well, here's, 5 or 6 players who we think are definitely getting into the Hall of Fame in the NBA, which is going to be quite annoying to people because while there's no question in the view of our sports writers at the New York Times that they will get into the Hall of Fame, it's pretty clear to us they're often quite disliked. And there are many people who argue vehemently against their induction. And they give a couple of examples, and the best example is probably Dwight Howard. But, Carmelo Anthony falls in that category, Vince Carter, Chris Bosh, and even Chris Paul. And
why do people not like that?
So that's the Times says, why is that? Why is that? Well, first of all, you don't have quite the hometown thing because the NBA players travel from team to team more than, at least these particular players, more than you see in the baseball players. But to me, the answer is clear. The reason why you can have such a disparate set of views in terms of qualification for the Hall of Fame is that basketball is a team game. So when your statistics can give you a sense of your contribution to the ball club. You can argue a little back and forth, hitting at the right time, that sort of thing, doing the little things. That's okay. But statistics really tell the story. As A-Rod used to say, when people complained about him, he said, hey, I drove in 130 runs. A couple of them must have won us a ball game, right? But when you look at the basketball players, when you have the ball in your hands, 4 of your teammates don't. And so the question is not just, are you scoring or is something happening? Do you have something to show for at the end of the day? But was the ball being put to the best use when it was in your hands? Were you facilitating the team's advancement so that it might possibly win the game? And that's a more subtle thing. And each of these players are associated with losing teams. And some of it, some winning teams, but often losing teams. And again, going back to Dwight Howard, he's considered poison by many in terms of teams. Teams don't succeed with Dwight Howard. And you know why? It's because it's Dwight Howard. So you can have glowing statistics, glowing credentials in that sense in the NBA and be a guy that no one wants on your team. And I think that makes for a pretty interesting duality and makes you wonder whether those kind of folks do belong in the Hall of Fame. And I can see opposing quite a few of these players. In any event, you don't see that with baseball. Everybody's happy with the choices, and that's what we have.
Where is the Hall of Fame? The NBA Hall of Fame.
The NBA Hall of Fame. It's the tip of my tongue. I'm going to think about it.
All right, so I guess that proves the point.
Oh, it's not nearly as big a deal as Cooperstown, the Basketball Hall of Fame.
We'll never know. We'll never know. All right, moving right
along.
Oh,
it's in Springfield, Massachusetts. I just remember it. They don't tell you in the article.
Uh-huh.
But, yeah, it's not the same
All
thing.
right, so now we know the difference between the Baseball Hall of Fame
It's a team game. It's a team game. It's a difference between baseball and basketball in many ways. There's a tension in basketball. It's just different.
Okay.
Okay. So we're going to talk about
now I'm going to explain to you when you should eat.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm not going to go heavily into this because it seems too complicated for
me.
But there was an article in the New York Times, and I just noticed it because I missed the article in the Times because it's also sometimes difficult to get a paper.
That's true.
In Block Island, but there was mention subsequent days that people were commenting like crazy on this article by Anahad O'Connor. When we eat or don't eat may be critical for health. And it's describing the findings by Sachin Panda about the circadian code in terms of eating. Now, we know about the circadian rhythm of our lives, right? And there's been lots of discussion about sleep, how important sleep is, and of course, when you sleep. And there's a lot of discussion for this in terms of dementia and losing mental agility as you grow older. They seem to associate that with not as good sleep or sleep habits to some extent, because the brain has work to do when you're sleeping. This is an important downtime for the brain. And it turns out every organ is doing that as well. Okay, so sleep is not just important for the brain, it's important for every single organ. Okay, so how things work in your body really depends on getting that sleep. Okay, so what they're talking about is that people these days seem to graze, right? You just keep continuously eating and snacking until you pop into bed. Your body doesn't get any notice that it's time for bed. It's confused. Normally you stop eating at a certain time, okay, maybe when it's dark, all right? The body starts producing melatonin, which begins to shut things down and tell you to go to sleep. But you're sending bad signals if you're, keeping up with all your normal activities like eating, right? So this is the interesting thing. They find that if you eat earlier in the day, you burn more calories, digest the food better, have better blood sugar control. All this is happening if you do the majority of your eating in the morning. So they did studies. They did studies with mice. And they let some of the mice just eat as much as they wanted to of high fat and high sugar food. Okay? And other mice were restricted to like 6 hours a day. And guess what? Even though they ate the same amount, they had the same caloric intake, the mice who were limited in their eating hours were healthier and more active. And in other words, the mice who ate all day actually gained weight and were subject to more disease. Okay, so this is telling us that we should limit our eating, turn it off at a certain point, and above all, and you've heard this a million times, right? Eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, dinner like a pauper.
Yeah. Now, look, I'm afraid this is an area in which I feel I've seen studies that give you different results also, but I don't have that information in front of me. Maybe this is the final word now. Maybe it's right. I don't know.
They did a study with men too, not just mice.
Okay.
And the men had lower blood pressure. They actually, in some cases lost weight.
Yeah. The real interesting question to me, which is a narrow question, maybe they answer this in the study too, is if you eat early in the day, do you naturally eat less as the day goes on?
Apparently.
Well, that's interesting to me. That's not obvious, but it might be right. Might be right.
But anyway, I what's interesting to me is the interaction of all these organs with everything else that is going on. The idea that good digestion actually affects you emotionally, etc.
Oh, that I believe.
And so that what they're saying here is eating late tells the body it's still daytime. Okay, and that screws you up, just like jet lag, all right?
Yeah.
When you're in a different part of the world, and you're telling your body's saying, "But wait a minute, isn't it night time?" And you're trying to say, "No, wake up, let's do stuff."
Hey, look, I'm not saying it's wrong. It's not obvious to me it's right, but it might be right. So just a quick point about WeWork, just to gauge your reaction to this. This is something that we discussed on Block Island with the group, and that is that WeWork, memo from the boss, meat is not an option.
So explain what WeWork is.
WeWork is, well, let me go back to those department stores which have to be repurposed. WeWork is buying those buildings and setting it up as group working space, where people can buy a membership or a license or whatever and come into space and use the space that's set up for computers and phones and whatever, and be in a creative environment where others are working, pursuing their own endeavors, and maybe they'll be buoyed by the other's energy or spurred on by some of their ideas, and it becomes a cooperative working space.
And they have a lot of properties.
They're
And
tremendously
it
successful.
can be used by individuals. Various size companies
Right.
actually use their spaces and pay for them to maintain them, etc.
It's sort of a
instead of renting their own.
hoteling for workspace. Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, but that's interesting. So the head of the company is saying no more meat.
Well, let's be clear. So it's not a matter of saying if you want to use WeWork space, you can't eat meat. Although maybe the cafeteria won't be serving meat at a lot of these places. But to me, the more startling point, not startling, but a more extreme point, is that the people who work for WeWorks are being actively discouraged from eating meat, so much so that they will not be allowed to expense meals that include meat. So if they go out with a customer and they both have hamburgers, WeWork's not paying for it.
That's amazing.
Well, yes.
I mean, I read the part about they're not serving meat at their functions.
Right. Well, that's
like
different.
if they have a party.
That's different.
That's one thing. But that seems very paternalistic.
Well, it is very paternalistic, and in this article they're compared to Hobby Lobby. Hobby Lobby has refused to pay for birth control for its employees, citing the owner's Christian values. And what WeWork is saying is they believe that eating meat is something that's bad for the planet because there's so much resources that have to go into developing cattle. And I wouldn't call it a religious view, but it's a philosophical view, or it's a political view, and you could say it's being foisted upon the employees. And when asked about that, this fellow Miguel McKelvey, who's the person behind the policy, says that imposing his values on his employees is a natural part of being a corporate leader today. Companies have greater responsibility to their team members and to the world these days. We're the ones with the power.
Imposing his values. That just doesn't sound
It doesn't.
good. And you remember Noel worked for Whole Foods.
Right.
And the head of Whole Foods was trying to promote veganism.
Right.
And so she actually got incentives to...
Well, you know something, incentives are one thing, but this is an absolute ban in a sense. It's out there, but you see, I think his quote that you were right to focus on, he's pretty clear about it. He says, oh, no, my values, since I believe in them, I think there's a great deal of significance that I would attach to them, and I feel the responsibility in making something happen on my watch on this planet. So this is the way we're going to do it.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, well, that's the winner's right history, as I like to say.
So that seems incredibly complicated. Let's go back to the simple world of art history.
Yes.
And this time out in San Francisco at the Legion of Honor.
Right.
Is an exhibition that's been open for a little while, and it's about the Pre-Raphaelites. Easy for me to say. Truth and Beauty, the Pre-Raphaelites, and the Old Masters. And the review actually says understanding a complex aesthetic. So this is just kind of fun because I don't know if you're familiar with the Pre-Raphaelites. Perhaps not. Is that resounding silence I'm hearing?
Well, I've heard the phrase. It doesn't come up in the Hall of Fame voting too very often.
In 1848, and this is a review is by Judith Dobrinsky. In 1848, more than a dozen years before artists in Paris rebelled against the French Academy to create Impressionism, William Holman Hunt, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, and John Everett Millais, aged 21, 20, and 19, launched a very different artistic revolt in London, deriding the formulaic teachings of the Royal Academy and calling Sir Joshua Reynolds, its first revered president, Sir Schloshua. To mock his free, brushy, grand style of painting, the trio plus 4 lesser lights started a secret society to advance a new aesthetic. And basically the idea of Pre-Raphaelites, not that they didn't like Raphael, they did like Raphael and Michelangelo and others, but they didn't like what followed, the slavish imitations of Raphael's style. So they focused on a pure art of truth in nature as espoused by John Ruskin. And the thing is, it didn't seem very natural. So it's a little confusing. I get what the review is saying here. But anyway, the exhibition compares the paintings by the Pre-Raphaelites, which are kind of fun, there's no doubt about it, with the old masters and how they might have inspired them. The funny thing is, though, when they're painting these things, none of those guys had even been to Italy and had seen very much of the old masters they're complaining about or emulating. In fact, to some extent, their art was based more on people like Jan van Eyck, with whom I know you're very familiar.
Yes,
and
almost.
That whole style.
They're like the guy who runs WeWorks. They're just trying to straighten everybody else out, right?
And of course, Millet, you know, is famous because, remember that story about John Ruskin? So John Ruskin is like their, you know, their art god, all right? John Ruskin, remember, marries Effie Gray. They never consummate the marriage. Guess who swoops in and marries Effie after Ruskin and Effie finally split up? Millet.
Oh, what?
Yeah, John Everett Millet.
Okay.
So an interesting and complex group of people there. I think it would be fun to see. The Pre-Raphaelites were all the rage in the 70s.
The 1870s.
The 1970s.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it just seemed so, I don't know, it's kind of linear, it's crisp, truth be told, I might have done my thesis on a Pre-Raphaelite.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I can see you're deeply into this. Good. Excellent. So you had a story about, it's a follow-up, actually.
What? Yeah.
We talked about someone who's passed away.
Yeah, and that is that last week Kathy Kriger passed away.
Yeah.
Now, you may remember, she's the woman, the diplomat, who retired and started a cafe, Rick's Cafe, in Morocco.
Right.
You know, creating what had been imagined in the movie Casablanca. And she actually had a stroke last Tuesday and passed away on Thursday.
But the article told us that she'd run for like 14 years or so.
Yeah. And remember, at the end of the article, she says, "This is my old age home,
right?
You know, assisted living home. This is my life, my activity."
Right.
In the obituary, they even mentioned that people said she looked great. She looked younger than ever. So very sad that she is gone. And I just want to end today with a quote from her. "If I'm honest," she says, "I always thought I would find a man while following my dream." Ms. Kriger, who was divorced, wrote in 2012 in a memoir about Rick's. "That didn't happen," she said cheerfully. "Instead, with Rick looking over my shoulder, I found myself."
Well, that's very nice. Very nice. And she sounds like she was happy in her work.
Yes.
Well, right to the very end.
So that's all we've got.
Yes, well, that's plenty. And we're tired. We're still getting over vacation. We can't be expected to work this week. I don't know why.
So see you next week with Tamsen and Dan reading the paper.
Thanks. Bye.